Shalom, this is Yitzchak Reuven speaking from Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 10th day of the month of Sivan, 5780, the 2nd of June, 2020. This coming Shabbat here in Israel, we'll be reading Beha'alotcha, when you raise up or light up the lights, the 7 lights of the menorah. It is the third Torah reading of the book of Numbers in the diaspora. Starting this week, you're going to be 1 week behind us in Israel, because last week, Shavuot, which was celebrated here in Israel on Thursday evening, Friday, was in the diaspora, of course, a 2-day holiday, as are all the pilgrimage festivals celebrated in the diaspora, 2 days. So that on Shabbat, while we were reading Parshat Naso, the second reading of Bamidbar, Numbers, here in Israel, you in the diaspora were still reading the special readings for Shavuot, so you will only be reading Naso this week, this coming Shabbat, while we will proceed to Beha'alotcha, and this difference will be our lot for the next few weeks until the diaspora catches up to we in the land of Israel. So, I will be speaking about Beha'alotcha, and we will be posting a video teaching this week on Beha'alotcha. But of course, anyone who is a week behind can still most certainly view our posting of Naso, last week's video teaching, and learn about Parshat Naso. America's in chaos. I'm very, very sorry to report. It is very discouraging and very painful to watch and to hear what's coming out of America right now. It seems that a terrible incident of police brutality, police murder, I think I can say that. I think it's pretty clear from the video. Not only inspired protests, but it seems very clear that radical groups across America took advantage, saw this as a go-ahead sign to throw more oil onto the fire, as we say here in Israel, to ignite the situation and to cause chaos, destruction, and rage, and basically to just set one community against another all across America. So now everybody seems to be blindly enraged, one against the other, and there doesn't seem to be a guiding light to call the people to order, and that's really what's needed. I mean, we're all human beings, and Americans are American citizens, and America is a very decent nation, a very great nation with a tremendous amount to offer to its people and to the world. And it is very, very painful to see what's going on in America. God willing, it will get better. And God willing, people will rise above the pain and the anger and embrace one another, because that really is the only way forward. And the actual incident that took place in Minnesota seems to be, very unfortunately, has been pushed aside as all these this rioting and chaos and destruction has taken center stage. And again, it seems that there has been some very deliberate action on the part of radical elements who've been waiting, perhaps, for this moment to pounce in order to shake America and try to weaken America. And let's all pray that America can wake up and pick up the pieces and pull themselves back together and reunite as a nation of many different peoples and of many different opinions, but a nation nevertheless which can only prosper and move forward if it works together in order to move forward. So again, my prayers are with America. May peace prevail, and may reason prevail, and may respect and love one another prevail. Love your neighbor as yourself. Really, that's the only way forward. So let's hope for the very best. Today, Tuesday, the 10th of Sivan, we're actually still in what are known as the Yemei Miluim, 7 days of Shavuot, even though, as everybody knows, Shavuot is a one-day festival. Of the 3 pilgrimage festivals ordained, commanded by Torah, only Shavuot is a single-day festival, as opposed to Sukkot and Pesach, Passover, which are 7-day festivals. But because of its being only one day and of the difficulty for pilgrims back in the day of the Holy Temple to all arrive and take part in the celebration and in the ceremony of the first fruits on a single day, it was extended for 7 days. There's only the one day of Shavuot that is a day of no labor, no work, as are the other holidays and Shabbat, of course. But the other 6 days following the first day of Shavuot are still days in which pilgrims can bring their offerings, their first fruit offerings, and perform the ceremony which is described in the book of Deuteronomy, the confession, as it were. My father was a wandering Aramean. It discusses the entire history of the nation of Israel that went down into Egypt and came out a strong nation and eventually entered the land of Israel and now offers up, out of gratitude, the first fruits of the land of Israel. So we are still, through tomorrow, we are still enjoying the afterglow of the Shavuot holiday, which was celebrated here in Israel last Thursday evening, Friday, and as is the custom for many, many generations now, one of the ways of celebrating Shavuot is to learn all night, to study Torah all night. There are actually fixed teachings called Tikkun Leil Shavuot, in which all different texts, including many pieces of the Torah itself, are studied throughout the night until early morning. At about it was about 5:30 in the morning when Shacharit, when the morning service could begin. So for 6, 7, 8 hours, people were studying without sleep. Other people study texts and subjects of their own initiative, and it is something that's very widespread in Israel and a very beautiful practice. It's an amazing thing to study all night and to actually find yourself becoming more wide awake as the night goes along, because what you're studying is so fascinating, and to leave your studying only to walk to the synagogue, if you're not studying in the synagogue, at the break of dawn, and watch other people and see other people in the street also walking to synagogue. It's a very beautiful, very inspiring tradition here in Israel and in Jewish communities around the world. And then, of course, we also read the book of Ruth, the scroll of Ruth, on Shavuot. And in fact, Ruth is the grandmother, the great-grandmother of King David, whose day of birth and day of passing from this world is on Shavuot. So there's a lot going on Shavuot, which, like I said, took place last Thursday, Friday here in Israel in a diaspora. They celebrated a second day on Shabbat. And now we are moving forward in time. And in this week's Torah reading of Beha'alotcha, we're also beginning our move forward in the desert. Final destination, the land of Israel. But actually, after all this preparation and everything that we've read and studied over the past few months, from the first chapter, actually the closing chapter of Exodus, through the first chapter of Leviticus, and up to now, and here the reading of Beha'alotcha, which begins in the 8th chapter of Numbers. We're still on the first day of Nisan, the first month, 1 year following the Exodus from Egypt. Of course, just less than 1 year, because Israel left Egypt on the night of the 14th of Nisan. Really, it was the 15th by the time they left. And so just under a year, here we are, after all we've been through, the Sea of Reeds, Mount Sinai, the building of the tabernacle, all the incidents that we studied in Leviticus, the inauguration of the tabernacle, the death of Nadav and Avihu. Later we learned of the Shabbat, the breaker of Shabbat, and we learned of the blasphemer. All these things took place within this period of time, and as we will read later in the book, in this week's Torah reading, it was on the 20th of Nisan, this second year, that the encampment first moved forward. Of course, from the beginning of the book of Numbers, the Torah has been focused to a great extent on the organization of the encampment around the tabernacle, the creation of armed forces so that Israel could march in security forward into the land of Israel. And of course, as of this moment in the book of Numbers, we are still anticipating a very early entry into the land of Israel. Everything's all set. We just got to get there now. So, but the very beginning of Beha'alotcha begins this way again. Numbers chapter 8, verse 1. I'm going to read a few verses. HaShem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall cast their light toward the face of the menorah." Aaron did so. He lit the lamps toward the face of the menorah as HaShem had commanded Moshe. And then verse 4 goes on to describe once again the actual construction of the menorah. This was the form of the menorah, hammered work of gold, from its base to its flower. It was hammered work, according to the form that Hashem had shown Moshe, so did he construct the menorah. That was a little bit of review, but it's asked, again, it's been mentioned before, it was mentioned in Leviticus that on that first day of the inauguration of the tabernacle that Aaron lit the menorah, the 7 lamps of the menorah. So why is it mentioned again here? Well, actually, this describes more directly, and it describes the actual commandment from God to Moshe, to Aaron, to light the menorah. But also, our sages tell us that after the 12 tribal leaders of Israel each brought their gifts to the tabernacle, which we read about at the conclusion of Naso, which was last week's Torah reading here in Israel. After each tribal leader brought on behalf of their tribe these gifts, and each assortment of gifts was identical from tribe to tribe, and each of the first 12 days of the inauguration of the tabernacle, a different tribe would bring their gifts. So actually that would bring us to the 12th day of Nisan. That Aaron, again, this is a midrash according to our sages, Aaron was a little bit sad. What could he bring? How come he hadn't been instructed? How come he didn't merit the privilege of being able to bring a gift? Even though, of course, he was very busy with preparing the offerings, and he had much to do in the tabernacle. But despite this, he felt, in his tribe, Levi, they didn't bring a gift. So he's comforted by being given the commandment of being able to light the menorah for the very first time in the tabernacle, which of course the menorah was lit in such a fashion each morning as part of the daily service, the Tamid service, that there was always lamps lit. It never was extinguished. And so when Aaron lit it for this first time, he was lighting it basically till the end of days. Of course, we don't have a temple right now, so there is no lit menorah, but that was the idea. And when we do have a temple, it will be relit, and those days of darkness will have passed. The reading then goes on to describe, again, the initial sanctification of the Levites, how they came to replace the firstborn of the children of Israel as the representatives in the tabernacle / holy temple, and then it goes on. The portion goes on to discuss something we usually discuss twice a year, and that is the second Passover. This is from chapter 9, verse 1. HaShem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert in the second year of their exodus from the land of Egypt in the first month, saying, the children of Israel shall make the Passover offering in its appointed time. On the 14th of this month, you shall make it in its appointed time in accordance with all its statutes and its ordinances, and you shall make it. And Moshe spoke to the children of Israel, instructing them to make the Passover offering. So that's what they did. But then there were people who came up to Moshe. There are men who are ritually unclean because of contact with a dead person and therefore cannot make the Passover offering on that day. So they approached Moshe and Aaron on that day, and they said, what can we do? We want to be included too. It's our obligation as well. Now, again, Midrash steps in and says, who are these men that happen to be ritually unclean, have tamei met, because of contact with a dead body? The sages say that they must have been the men who carried out the bodies of Nadav and Avihu after they died after offering strange fire, uncalled for offering on the first day of the inauguration of the tabernacle that we read about many weeks ago in the book of Leviticus. So because of that, they were ritually unclean, and so a very fascinating thing takes place there, which there are a few cases where this happens throughout the 5 books, the Torah, in which Moshe says, well, I don't know. Wait, and I will hear what Hashem instructs concerning you. So Hashem does respond immediately and says, yes, there shall be a second Passover on the 14th of the second month of the year. That is the month of Iyar. And for those who were unable, either because they were ritually impure and were not able to undergo the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer on them before they could bring an offering, which would render them pure, or they were at a great distance and didn't get to Jerusalem in time in future generations. It's interesting because the response, Hashem's response, which clarifies their question, answers their question, also includes a response to future generations. So if you were on the way to Jerusalem but couldn't make it in time, you can bring the offering the second time. But anybody who just didn't, wasn't inspired to come the first time, no, you are not welcome to try to do a makeup offering. And in fact, the Passover offering, just like Brit Milah, just like circumcision, they are the only 2 positive commandments. The only 2 positive commandments in the Torah which the negligence of not doing them is punished by karet. And karet is a heaven-sent punishment which is understood as being someone will meet an untimely death. They'll die before their time because they didn't perform either of these 2 commandments. There are also what we call negative commandments, lota, things that you're not instructed not to do, commanded not to do, and there also some of those also merit the punishment of karet, being cut off from your people if you did them even though you're instructed not to. These are the only 2 commandments that we're instructed to do, which if you neglect and don't do, you receive karet, which is considered to be a very severe punishment. And both the Brit Milah, the circumcision, and the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, are really forms of a covenant between the individual and the nation and God. So they're extremely significant, and from that perspective, we understand why the punishment was so very, very severe. Next, in the reading of Beha'alotcha, which has a lot in it, and it's really a turning point in the book of Numbers. We're going to see why in a minute. And it's a pivotal Torah reading because of that. So let us continue in the book of Numbers, chapter 9, verse 15. It says, "On the day that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was erected, the cloud covered the tabernacle, which was a tent for the testimony. And at evening there was over the tabernacle like an appearance of fire, which remained until morning." Right? This is the Shekhinah. This is God's presence, the cloud of glory, however you want to describe it. That was on the tabernacle day and night. Right? During the day it was a cloud. At night it had the appearance of fire. And it was there always, except, we'll continue to read, "and according to the cloud's departure from over the tent. And afterwards the children of Israel would travel. And in the place where the cloud settled, there the children of Israel would encamp." So basically we're learning for the first time that the travels of Israel from this point on until Israel enters into the land are going to be determined by God, not by man, not by Moshe, not by a council of elders, but by God. And the signal will be that the cloud of glory, the Shekhinah, will depart from the tabernacle, and that will be a signal to Moshe and the leaders to inform the entire encampment that it's time to go. Here's the music. It's time to go. I'll be right back. Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. It's Reuven here in Jerusalem, Israel, 10th of Sivan, 5780, June 2nd, 2020. We've been talking about this week's Parsha here in Israel, Beha'alotcha, and some things we haven't mentioned. I don't think I mentioned the coronavirus. First time in many, many weeks that I didn't start the show with the coronavirus, but unfortunately it is raising its ugly head again here in Israel. After the lockdown was lifted and a lot of the restrictions were lightened or ended, and people began going back to school and stores were opened and even public gatherings were permitted, etc., etc., numbers of new infections began to grow again. Basically, dramatically, last week, while everybody was observing Shavuot, numbers were starting to rise again precipitously, not good. And many of these new cases were in schools where someone returned who had the illness, and then they discovered it, and so then the school shut down, and students and teachers are all put in isolation again to wait it out. So we're sort of in another moment of truth here. Are we going to have to start to ramp up again the restrictions, or can we carefully ride it out? And again, carefully riding it out means that everybody must abide by the minimal instructions, which is to always wear a mask and to keep distance and hygiene. And you'd be surprised, I guess you wouldn't, if you've been outside anywhere. I'm sure it's pretty universal. You know, most people wear masks, but not everybody. And the people not wearing masks, if they're on a bus, if they're, you know, in a closed area, they're endangering not only themselves, but other people. And I would imagine that the one thing that everybody can do, and probably the most intelligent thing everybody can do, is to wear a mask. It's annoying, it's uncomfortable, whatever. But you know what? It can save lives, and it can also enable the country, whatever country you're in, to move forward and try to revive its economy and its public life again. But if people don't abide by these basic rules, then we're in trouble. That's what I got to say about that, the corona. But on much brighter news, Temple Mount reopened this Sunday. Again, it was a result of this agreement, secret agreement that everybody knew about here in Israel, between the government of Israel and the government of Jordan. And that was to close the Temple Mount throughout the entire Muslim month of Ramadan, which is a holy month for the Muslims, and during which, on normal years, throughout that month, hundreds of thousands of Muslims are up on the Temple Mount, which this year would have been a very, very dangerous health situation. So Jordan, which controls the Waqf, which is the Muslim authority on the Temple Mount, agreed to close it for the duration of the month of Ramadan, as long as Israel would close it to Jews. Without getting back into that whole topic, the month of Ramadan ended, and the final feast days of Ramadan ended, and the Mount was reopened on Sunday to all, and many hundreds of Jews went up first thing Sunday morning, and throughout this week, the past 2 days as well, hundreds of Jews are going up. It's very quiet up in the Temple Mount. Jews are once again there, and once again prayer is being heard, Jewish prayer is being heard on the Temple Mount. Picking up where we left off, which was a much more relaxed police attitude toward the status quo, which prevents any Jewish prayer on the Mount. But as everybody knows, in the past year, that restriction has been lessened and lessened, and in certain places and at certain times, audible Jewish prayer, in fact, communal prayer, has been allowed. And we heard a video on Sunday, which we posted on our Facebook page. You heard a clip of the Amidah, the daily prayer being said on the Temple Mount, prayer which requires 10 people, 10 Jews at the minimum. And so that is very good news. We have a new Minister of Police, Internal Security, who is very, very sympathetic to Jewish presence and to Jewish prayer and to Jewish sovereignty on the Temple Mount. So we're hoping that the progress that we've made over these past few years will continue to move forward on the Temple Mount. But the joy of being back, I haven't been back myself. I plan on going soon. But the joy of being back, of seeing other Jews on the Mount, is tremendous. We're back home. We're back where we belong. And I'm sure that the prayers that are uttered on the Mount will be felt, and it will be heard and registered. And God willing, we'll see better days in the future for the entire world. As you remember, you may recall that just before the mountain was closed, and it was closed for 70 days, the Temple Institute's Rabbi Yisra Ariel was on the Temple Mount saying a prayer on behalf of all the nations, the entire world, a prayer for protection from the corona. And such a shame that throughout the corona crisis, more prayers couldn't be heard from the Temple Mount. But we're back, and prayers are once again being uttered on the Mount. Back to our parasha, Beha'alotcha. And again, it's the third Torah reading of the book of Numbers. It begins in Numbers chapter 8, verse 1, concludes chapter 12, verse 16. That is this week's Torah reading here in Israel, in a diaspora. You're now a week behind us because of the 2-day Shavuot celebration in the diaspora, and you will be reading this week the Torah portion of Naso, Numbers 4:21 to 7:89. But we're back in Beha'alotcha here, and we just got in our discussion at the conclusion of the first half of our show today, to the beginning of the moving forward of the encampment. God's presence, the cloud of glory, the Shekhinah, lifts itself up from off the tabernacle, and that is a sign to Moshe that it's time to move on. And so God then commands Moshe to fashion 2 silver trumpets that the Kohanim, the temple priests, can blow on in order to get the word out that it's time to move on, and also get the word out when it's time to rest again. When it's time to rest, the cloud of glory will again descend upon the encampment, and then the Levites will re-erect the tabernacle, and the traveling tribes will then set down camp again around the tabernacle in the precise formation that was described earlier in the book of Numbers. Now, these silver trumpets that are to be fashioned from a single piece of silver, each one, are to be used again to announce the time to depart, to announce the time to set up camp again. And it's understood that when there are 2 different types of blasts. One is a tkiyah, which is an extended sound of the shofar, a long blast, and then there's the truah, the truot, in plural, which are staccato-like blasts on the silver trumpets, and depending on which they hear, the people in the encampments will understand whether it is time to get started or time to move on. And also, it was a certain set of blasts on the trumpets would announce to the people that they need to assemble, that Moshe has something to tell them. And it also mentions here that in future generations, the trumpets will be blasted by the Kohanim to announce the beginning of festivals, holidays, the new moon, and that these trumpets are to be part of the service, the temple service throughout all the generations. So we learned that on the 20th day, from Numbers chapter 10, verse 11, on the 20th day of the 2nd month in the 2nd year, so this is the 2nd month now, it's the month of Iyar, on the 20th day, that for the first time the cloud rose up from over the tabernacle of the testimony, and the children of Israel traveled on their journeys from the Sinai desert, and the cloud settled in the desert of Paran. And that's where the people are going to encamp next. And the following verse says, this was the first journey at God's bidding through Moshe. So it's begun, people. It's begun. All this preparation, the arriving at Mount Sinai, receiving Torah, then Moshe coming down from the mount the 2nd time and instructing the people in the Torah that he heard upon Mount Sinai. And of course, the construction of the tabernacle. It's all taken place throughout this first year in the desert, and now, after all that time, Israel is ready to move on toward its destination, the land of Israel. And now, as Israel is about to move on, we have this story, this news, this just in, from chapter 10, verse 29. Then Moshe said to Chovav, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moshe's father-in-law. We're talking about Jethro. He has many names. He's given many names by Torah. Very fascinating thing in and of itself. And now we remember way back in the book of Exodus, right before Israel received Torah, that Jethro arrived with Moshe's wife Tzipporah and Moshe's two sons in the desert. He heard about all the good things that HaShem had done for Israel, how he brought them out of Egypt, and about the splitting of the Sea of Reeds. And he was thrilled for Israel, and he brought Moshe, his wife, and his two sons, and he even gave Moshe some advice about how to set up a system of judges so that Moshe didn't have to sit from morning till night and hear everybody's complaint, and that way wear himself thin, and that way wear out the people's patience. And he also, as we learned back then, was invited by Moshe to eat. They made offerings, and then he and Moshe and Aaron and the elders, the notables, all sat and had a meal together, a festive meal. And now we're told, after all this time, that Moshe said to him, "We are traveling to the place about which Hashem said, 'I will give it to you. Come with us, and it will be good to you.' But Hashem has spoken of good fortune for Israel." So Moshe is inviting his father-in-law to join them, basically to be part of the nation of Israel and travel with Israel into the land of Israel. But the response that Jethro, Chovav, son of Reuel, all these names, says to Moshe, he said to him, "I won't go, for I'll go back to my land and my birthplace." And then Moshe says, "But please, don't leave us, for because you're familiar with our encampment in the desert, and you will be our guide." In fact, in Hebrew, it's very beautiful. He says, "V'hayitu lanu la'einayim." You've been for us our eyes. It's very interesting. Now, they haven't moved. They haven't moved from Sinai up to this point. Yet Moshe says, "You've been our eyes in the desert. You will be our guide." It's very possible that Jethro was very familiar with the desert terrain, that he knew, what to expect. He knew what they could anticipate. Or perhaps Moshe was talking about his spiritual guidance, that he had said to Moshe, here's how you should appoint judges. And Moshe, he appreciated his expertise and his knowledge and wanted him to join them. It's not clear. It's also unclear because we learned that from now on, it's God's going to be determining when you move and where you're going to. So I'm not quite sure how, if Moshe is referring to Jethro's expertise in knowing the topography of the desert, how exactly that would help. But in any case, Jethro demurred and said he's going back to his land. Now it's interesting because we know that there were a group of people called the Canaanites that did enter into Israel with Israel, and that did settle. In fact, I believe that after the city of Jericho was conquered by Israel, and Israel did not move in. It was cursed. Israel did not move into Jericho, but it gave it to Yoshua, I believe, if I recall correctly, gave it to the Canaanites to live in. Now, Canaanites were the children, descendants of Jethro. So whether he went back to himself, went back to Midian and left some of his children with Israel, or whether he went back with some of his children and left some of his children with Israel, it does seem clear that part of the Jethro branch legacy did stay with Israel and became an allied nation to Israel in the land of Israel. is very fascinating because today the Druze community in Israel, which considers its prophet to be Jethro, again they have another name, yet another name for Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, but it's the same person, and he is their prophet who they honor, and they have also, in modern times, since the establishment of Israel, they have cast their lot with the nation of Israel. The Druze community in Israel, which is fairly small, it's a few 100,000, I believe, in number, but they are extremely, extremely loyal, very nationalist citizens of Israel. They serve in very high numbers in the Israeli armed forces, in the Israeli security police, and they've many Druze soldiers have fallen in action. They've risen up very, very high in the armed forces, and we have generals who are Druzim in the armed forces. And again, this legacy of Israel's partnership with Jethro and with the children of Jethro, these Canaanites, and you can read about them throughout the Hebrew scriptures. They're mentioned again in the book of Joshua, I think. Also later, maybe in Judges, maybe in Book of Samuel. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but they're mentioned from time to time, and again they were very, very always steadfast allies, partners of Israel. But Jethro himself decides to go back, and then we have an abrupt change. Very interesting thing happens in our reading. Numbers chapter 10, 2 verses come up, which each one they're both bracketed by the Hebrew letter Nun, and the Nun is flipped in the Torah, and it's almost literally looks like a modern bracket that we see in English, but basically it sets off the next 2 verses, and the next 2 verses are very beautiful, and they read like this: "So it was, whenever the ark set out, Moshe would say, 'Arise, O HaShem, may your enemies be scattered, and may those who hate you flee from you.' And when it came to rest, he would say, 'Repose, O HaShem, among the myriads of thousands of Israel.'" So apparently Moshe would say this prayer, these few words, every time that the cloud of glory, the Shekhinah, lifted itself up from the tabernacle, and it was time to move, and it's also described in our reading how then the Levites each would tend to their specific task, which they were given earlier in the book of Numbers, of how to break down the tabernacle and to carry it when the ark itself was covered up with the parochet and getting ready to be carried off, that Moshe would say this prayer. And again, when it was time to reestablish the encampment, he would say the second prayer. And again, these trumpet blasts would make known to all the encampments that it was time to get started, and the encampments would then begin to march in order, and again in the same order that they were established in terms of where they're going to be around the perimeter of the tabernacle, and in the same order Yehuda was the first, etc., and he is the first encampment, and the other 2 encampments with him are the first to lead the way. Of course, they were in the northern side, so they were facing north, facing the route toward Israel. And again, these encampments, it was choreographed very, very carefully, how they would travel, so that as they traveled through the desert, the tabernacle would still be in the center, at the heart of the traveling encampments, and of course then would be protected by any potential enemy, any potential outsider who tried to get to it. So, but what's fascinating is that basically we've come to, at this moment, we've come to the real height of the desert experience. All the good things that have happened till now, the Torah Sinai, the establishment of the tabernacle, we're starting our journey. It's a beautiful, these two beautiful verses, these prayers. It's at the height of everything. From now on, troubles begin. This is the break in the book of Numbers, which some of our sages even say this is a break. The book of Numbers is being broken into two books. Anyway, we're going to continue next week, the same subject, Temple Talk. Thank you for being with me. Temple Talk.